helpful. So, all right. So, wow, this screen got really bright here. So I guess the question is like, what is neurosurgery? What is organized neurosurgery? We know what neurosurgery is for the most part. So that's a really interesting question, because I didn't know when I was a junior resident and the like what that meant. Let's see if I can change this here. Washing out. It's a little better. What is an organization? Organized medicine, organized neurosurgery. So it's a group of neurosurgeons, in the case of organized neurosurgery, that have accepted the responsibility of serving the interests of all neurosurgeons, and really their patients, and contribute to the neurosurgical needs of the society of a whole, and the society being human beings, not just neurosurgeons. So it's a kind of a group of people that are professionals that get together to try and work on the field, more or less, and improve patient care and education, et cetera. So that's in general what it is. So it involves advocacy for patients, advocacy for members, advancement of education, advancement of innovation and research, in short. And there's many other facets to what organized neurosurgery does, but like these are the obvious fundamental ones that I could come up with. So as far as within organized neurosurgery, there's a large number of organizations that all have different roles, and there's two, sort of big ones that do many various things kind of in parallel. So one is obviously the American Association of Neurological Surgeons. The other one's the Congress of Neurological Surgeons, right? So they do a lot of the same stuff, but they're kind of synergistic in a lot of ways as well. So one of the big things that they do every year, they're, the deliverable, so to speak, that everyone sees, is the 2 annual meetings. And these are important because they're like a forum for putting together the highest quality education materials and training for CME purposes. Presentations that advance the field, research and guidelines, et cetera. They also do advocacy for neurosurgeons and neurosurgical patients to Washington, D.C. to influence policy in Washington. They support subspecialty sections nowadays, which is important. So even though all of neurosurgery has a research and education interest, there's also a subspecialty research and education interest to be supported. And then they also both have a philanthropic arm for funding research and resident education, and some degree medical student education as well. So I'm involved heavily with NREF, the NNS is a philanthropic arm, but also there's a CNS foundation, which does a similar work. And then both of these groups actually oversee, major or the major scientific journals in the field. So they kind of adjudicate that as being like an authority to house that information in the direction of the journals. So those are the big ones. Now, they all do a lot more stuff than we talked about there, and they're complex and very important in what they do behind the scenes, in addition to just putting on the meetings. But that's some of what they do. There are other notable societies as well. So one big one is like the oldest society that was founded by Cushing, actually. NNS was founded by Cushing, if I recall correctly, also. Called the Society of Neurological Surgeons. And what they really do is that they're the neurosurgical arm of the GME. So I'm not sure if it's really fair to say it exactly that way, but their job is to conform neurosurgery resident education to like a standard. So the Graduate Medical Education Board. So they have to make sure neurosurgery education is excellent across all the residency training programs. The Academy of Neurological Surgeons is really into advancement of scientific discovery and research for neurosurgical diseases. So they're really a group of neurosurgeons that want to foster and advance scientific research in our field. So they get together and discuss those parameters, and they've been very successful in advancing neurosurgical research funding, for example, along with many others, NREF, et cetera. I think we missed one. Yeah, so the Congress of State Neurological Surgeons. So every state has a neurosurgical society, and then they pass along concerns and resolutions, and then they all get together twice a year to discuss these resolutions and pass them, which then get moved along to the major, to organizations, CNS and NS, and then eventually often to Washington, depending on what it is. But it's a way for the state societies to influence the direction of national neurosurgery. Slide is weird. And then the American Board of Neurological Surgeons, the ABNS, they oversee the written and oral neurosurgery boards. So those are a few other societies that are kind of arms of the major two that we talked about. And there's more. There's like the fellowship for CAST, standards, etc. But that's just an overview of some of these societies. But one thing they all have in common, interestingly, I didn't really think about this when I was very junior, was every physician you see in any leadership position or committee, this is all volunteerism. So we, through involvement, and it's very prestigious to be involved, you're donating your time. So it has profound strategic implications for someone that wants to get involved in organized neurosurgery. Just to think of it that way, people put a lot of time and energy away from their families, away from their practice, away from their research, to push forward the field. And I think it's important to understand that's all volunteerism. No one gets paid for that. And that's important to know from like just a perspective of like that being very impressive, but also of how to think about leading in organized neurosurgery, for example, as well as how to get involved in organized neurosurgery. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Any questions or comments, that anything that wasn't clear? I don't want to just plow through slides and make this as interactive as possible.
Yeah, anybody that has questions, feel free to either raise your hand and I can unmute you, or put questions in the chat for the Q&A. Yeah, nothing from my standpoint at least.
All right, so that's pretty basic.
I'll monitor the chat for you.
Yeah. So just let me know if there's anything you want me to talk about as we go. So the next thing I thought we could talk about was just like my experience through organized neurosurgery and how I got involved and how it evolved, and how that may inform other people's way of thinking about organized neurosurgery and how to get involved in leadership. I think that's the simplest way to do it. So these slides are very interesting. That's not really the order. When I was an intern, after I matched as a medical student as well, up until PGY3, I did a lot of things, but one of them wasn't organized neurosurgery. So, I survived junior residency. This is one of our morning educational conferences that we'll talk about him. Dr. Heroes had every day of the week, except for when there was grand rounds. And there was one day that was spine conference at 7 a.m. So, just intense learning from a master educator. I decided to subspecialty. We had the ability to do some time as an enfolded fellowship kind of experience in the middle years of my residency at the time. And so I chose to do endovascular and then later vascular fellowship in open vascular. Just got along, and where solidarity and hard work, through the tough and long road of neurosurgery residency with my co-residents, right? Made lifelong friends. It's interesting. This is the delay. Got married, but attended 0 organized neurosurgical meetings. So, I was not involved at all. It was not on my radar. So the first one I went to, I just went out of curiosity because I'd heard about these things. Like I said, we spent 3 to 4 days a week with 4 days a week, I guess, with Dr. Heroes. So I heard him talk about his roles in NS, and he was one of the editors for the JNS, the Journal of Neurosurgery, and he was very involved in these things. So I heard a lot about it. So I was curious, and so I went to one of these meetings. And interestingly, at the main stage, he received the Cushing Medal, which is the distinguished medal here for in the NS for lifelong service, right? So it's just a matter of kind of like your models, I think, and your role models, and how you kind of think about what your career is going to be next and what you're familiar with and know how to do. So I want to talk about him because he exemplifies a leader to me in neurosurgery, and so hopefully through my understanding of his leadership, I can give you guys a little bit of background about how I think about leadership and how I learned about it. So this is Castro. So he led the Cuban Revolution, and so there was a not so hot leader whose name escapes me before him in Cuba, but it was very American government friendly, and he led a group of rebels that overthrew the government and instituted a new government, and which ultimately ended up being aligned with communism and the Russian government, which the U.S. government at the time didn't like. Dr. Hiros is Cuban. By the way, this looks a lot like Dr. Morcos. That was totally unintended, but I just realized that. I have to show that to Hiros and Morcos. They'll get a laugh out of it. So here's Dr. Hiros. I saw him obviously in his role as a chairman and program director. But this is him as a younger man. So he grew up in Cuba, and when that revolution happened, his family fled Cuba to Miami. And the idea was at the time was that the U.S. government didn't, and we're led by Kennedy at the time, if I remember, maybe Eisenhower for part of it, didn't like this new government in Cuba, and actually got together and trained about 2,000 expats in our military and supported them with air support, etc. And the plan was to airdrop them and boat them back into Cuba to retake over the country, called the Bay of Pigs. So this is all just to say, not so much history, but like the incredible mettle and determination of someone at like 19 years old to sacrifice his life potentially to go take back his country. I mean, this is like not just talk, this is action. So this is like real heroism and leadership. You can complain about Castro all you like, but until you parachute into the beach with a gun on your back, that's leadership. So this is him and a group of his friends who ultimately went back to fight against the Castro's government. And he has all kinds of stories about this time period, by the way. It's very, very fascinating. And then, of course, that they were incredibly outgunned. So Dr. Hiros tells stories about having his little gun and then the tanks rolling in. So this didn't last long, and they were all captured and stayed in internment camps or in prison for quite some time. He was ultimately returned to the U.S. in exchange for food and medicine and equipment. The story I always heard when I was there was that he was exchanged for a truck. That may be a little bit of hyperbole, but so after he got back, he ended up staying with one of his uncles in Memphis, Tennessee. He hadn't gone to college, so he had sold insurance door to door and wanted to go to college. I believe he had an uncle who was a neurosurgeon, or uncle was a physician, if I remember correctly. So that was kind of in his family lineage. A university official heard about his story, and I don't remember exactly how he was exposed to football, but he played football, and offered him a football scholarship, an American football scholarship to Rhodes College in Memphis. So he started off on a football scholarship, and then eventually transitioned actually to an academic scholarship as well. And then he graduated, did well, went to University of Tennessee for medical school, also influenced by some of the same people. He ended up graduating first of his class, attended neurosurgical residency, which is a young field at the time at Mass General. And then I met him at about this age when he was a super accomplished and incredibly good neurosurgeon who had influenced the field in many ways. One of the ways he influenced it was through leadership and volunteering in organized neurosurgery. So if I recall correctly, he had been president of the CNS, NNS, and the World Federation of Neurological Surgeons. And he was an editor at the JNS. So he was the president of the WFNS while I was a resident and an editor at the JNS. And he had been president of the WNS about 5 years before I got there. So this is what I saw, which was that this guy gave his time, energy, and considerable talents, national stature talents, to us as residents daily. He led by example. He really did. He only asked of others what he did himself. He was a prolific, gifted educator. I mean, it's just unbelievable now as a faculty to think that he showed up at 7 in the morning, essentially every day, when he could have just showed up one day a week at 7 in the morning. to teach us. And he was very regimented with us, like we were in the military, and he expected a lot of reading from us. But like I said, he was the most encyclopedic stature in neurosurgery when it comes to knowledge base that I've ever seen, and he imparted that on us, and it was a real gift. He modeled service to organized neurosurgery. As I said, I saw that. He talked about it, and he just accepted only excellence from himself and others. Second role model I saw was Dr. Morkos. So he got to know Dr. Hiros when Dr. Hiros was chair at University of Minnesota, and eventually came to join the faculty in Miami. He's a master surgeon, a tremendous gentleman. He had role models that were Dr. Hiros and Dr. Yazergo, and also was ascending, but in a more junior level through organized neurosurgery when I was there. And he's been a tremendous and unwavering advocate, not only for our field, but also for my career, which I'm eternally grateful for. It's a photo at graduation. And then the last person who was really, influential in me seeing how organized neurosurgery worked was Stacy Wolf. So she is currently the program director at Wake Forest. I met her. She was my chief resident when I was a PGY2, but I met her when I was a medical student. She was a PGY4 because when I rotated at Miami as a medical student, Hurricane Katrina happened, and I volunteered to go with a group of people from Miami to where the eye went across land in Hurricane Katrina, which was in Waveland, Mississippi, to help with just medical care and relief there. And it was place was devastated. But this is Stacy, and this is me in our younger, skinnier years. But when I became a middle year resident, she was actually the chair of the young neurosurgeons group, which I ultimately became more involved in. And again, it wasn't like a really personal mentorship in the sense that we didn't talk all the time and she didn't help get me in per se, but it was just again modeling. Anytime I had a question, I could ask her, and she was always kind of around. So when I had to do a project, I ran it by her, early on. And she transitioned. So I was elected, which is a national election, has nothing to do with her influence, but just more of a role model. And then she was out, and I had two other chairs after her of the committee while I was there. So that was a lot of talking. So just to back up a little bit, so I was involved in the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. What is that? So the first question is, what is the YNC? So we talked a little bit about it. It was founded in 1931, and it's a scientific education association with 10,000 worldwide members. And we kind of talked that it's, one of its major roles is to, promote education advocacy and highest quality patient care. So how did I initially get involved in the YNC? It predates my time on the YNC a little bit. So this is Shelley Timmons, who at the time when I started getting involved in organized neurosurgery as a middle year resident, she was in charge of the IT committee, which stands for information technology. She ultimately became president of the YNC later, but back at the time she was just on the committee. So I got an email, and I tell this story to kind of maybe inform other people and how they get involved. I got an email from the YNC, as did it probably all the residents, asking for if you wanted to be on the IT committee. And the iPhone was relatively new, social media was just in its infancy, and I was super interested in all these things. And I was like, man, this technology and social media is going to revolutionize this stuff, and I can contribute because I'm young, I'm facile with these things, and I would love to help bring some of these concepts to organized neurosurgery. So that was my initial goal for wanting to join the IT committee. So I actually was able to dig up my essay. So you're supposed to do a one-page essay. So that's it. So I wrote an essay, and apparently 30 to 40 people, if I recall, conversations later, applied, and I want to say there was 3 positions. And so I wrote this essay, and I was fortunate enough to be accepted as one of the members. And so, there wasn't really a defined role. This is the acceptance letter I also managed to find on one of my old jump drives. Probably shouldn't put that on my head. So what did I do when I got there was, I just volunteered and had good ideas, right? So they didn't really have a specific role, but the few things they asked me to do, which I think edit some video content, help with different things, put input into, the website and the app that they were trying to develop at a little bit later. And I was just very involved and had good ideas, and you know, it was good to work with, and showed up and was reliable. And through that, you know, I was on that committee for something like 6-8 years. They eventually, you know, gave me a full position. And the lesson there, we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's just, you know, just find something you're interested in, you can contribute and get involved and be reliable and have good ideas and be fun to work with, and you get far. So that's kind of, you know, the simple answer about how to get involved in organized neurosurgery. So after I got involved there, then I wanted to see about, you know, how more I could get involved. And the natural thing is the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. So there's not too many entry points for young people into organized neurosurgery, but this was a prominent one. This was actually started by Dr. Hiros. There's like a paper that our committee wrote at the 30-year anniversary of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. If anybody's interested in the JNS, you can look it up, about the history of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee and how that started. It was back in the early 90s. So he helped essentially from the senior level get some people to get started on the Young Neurosurgeons Committee, and it's grown since then. So as of now, it's the group where young neurosurgeons, and actually there's several resident medical student positions as well, can get together, integrate into the organization. It has a lot of roles now in young neurosurgeons, but integrate in the organization, get onto committees with the senior people. Also, we have our own projects we do that help medical students and help other residents. And then the one secondary thing that we do is by integrating in this way, we actually are mentored by other people that we interact with that are more senior. And so through our own committee and through these interactions, we develop the future leaders of neurosurgery. We also provide this channel for young neurosurgeons to, you know, get the ear of the more senior group and impact the direction of the specialty. So I wanted to be involved in this for historical reasons, and because I thought it was a great way to integrate into organized neurosurgery. So I ultimately, you know, the way the process works is you have to be nominated and send in a letter. And many other people do this as well. And then there's a national vote, and then certain people are elected to the committee. So I was elected in 2012. And then after that, you know, you are assigned 1 or 2 groups to go to. And of course, I volunteered to be on the IT committee since I had an interest in that. So I was liaison to the IT committee. It wasn't a super popular one. So, you know, unlike being the spine section liaison or something like that, it was easy to integrate. So I continued that work on the IT committee as being the official liaison from young neurosurgeons after that. You know, one of their big emphases at the time, the few things that they ran at the national meeting was Top Gun, which was like a competition amongst all the residents who could do kind of like essentially virtual reality surgeries the best, and it was scored and there was a winner. So that had kind of been like becoming less and less popular over time, so they wanted to revamp it. So I volunteered to help with that, and the contribution was that added a competition component between programs. So for a while there was like a national winner of the, you know, the program that had the best score, et cetera. So that seemed to garner a lot of interest. We put a lot of this onto what ended up being my role in the committee that I came up with, which was to have a social media and IT presence. So we put a lot of this, you know, competition stuff on social media, so it became better known, right? I volunteered to revamp the Young Neurosurgeons web pages. I wanted to have a Young Neurosurgeons social media account, but at the time, there's a lot of resistance about that from the senior YNC board of directors perspective because of like some early experience with like the Uncle Harvey forums. I think there's a little bit of hesitance that they didn't really fully understand if this could devolve into kind of like mudslinging a little bit. But eventually convinced them, you know, wrote a series of rules, was very prepared, had a plan. And Stacy actually, before she finished her time as chief or as the chair, here she is getting her like little award for being the chair. And this is Crystal Tomei, who was the Young Neurosurgeons chair to follow. I was able to get it passed through the board that we could have a social media presence. So we started YNC Twitter in like 2013, 14, something like that, maybe 2014. And had revamped the website. And then I ran the Twitter account for many years. And it was successful. It was like an outward facing, you know, way to get what the Young Neurosurgeons community was doing out there, interact with other people, with the idea being maybe not everybody checks their email, but they may interact with you on social media. And so through all that service, in kind of opening a new avenue for the committee, that was kind of in a meritocracy way, which is the way we like to do on the committee, rewarded with more and more kind of like senior and higher level positions. And the one that I was kind of asked to be involved with was the CSNS, which we kind of glossed over earlier, was where all the state societies come together and pass resolutions So I was liaison, it was a new position at the time, and I was a liaison to that group for several years, and it was great. But that's kind of how I think you need to think about involvement, which is just like get plugged in, show up, be energetic, take on projects, do them well, and you'll advance. So I don't think there's like a really particularly complex formula. That's pretty much it. So other things that I did when I was there, eventually I was elected internally within the Neurosurgeons Committee. I ran for the secretary, which naturally transitioned to chair. So it's 2 years as secretary, 2 years as chair. So I was elected to that position based on my work. And it is a meritocracy thing. You can't just show up out of the blue and run, expect to win. You have to have done a lot of work and have a resume. They make you put your resume, what you've done on the committee when you go through the election process. So I don't remember exactly in the timeline, but I was also helping develop neurosurgerymatch.org, which some of you guys may have heard of at the time. But those is, in addition, I was the standard, ran the newsletter as secretary, which is a big job. Continues the IT lead. And then, we have all these executive committee, which is like the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary, and a few other people that kind of talk about the direction of all the projects. And so I would contribute as a member of the executive committee, is what we call it. So then in 2018 through 2020, I became the chair after that secretary experience. So as that experience, you get to go and actually be a part of the board of directors meetings, which is amazing. So you meet all the highest level people in the YNC in a lot of the sections, and you feel very much a part of the direction of Organized Neurosurgery. And as the chair, you're representing the Young Neurosurgeons Committee and the group of all the young neurosurgeons below that. There was a really amazing opportunity to become that Dr. Bucka gave the Young Neurosurgeons group, which is to elect on a meritocracy way, a meritocratic way, reviewers for the JNS. So you kind of become an ad hoc part of their editorial board. Through that process, I was actually elected to that position as well, and I became a JNS reviewer. So these are like amazing, opportunities that only happen because I worked hard at volunteering for this and that, right? And then I was the YNC chair during the pandemic, which is interesting because I had one in-person meeting, I think, during my 2-year time there as chair. But viewed this as an opportunity to think about other ways that the Young Neurosurgeons Committee could contribute to young neurosurgeons in the absence of actually in-person meetings, which is like the majority of what our role was at the time. So one thing we came up with was the Young Neurosurgeons in NRF webinar, which we had 16 episodes in that one year during the pandemic. And I don't know exactly how many it is now, but it's over 15,000 views of those webinars on YouTube, not including the in-person ones. In combination with the MSNTC, we started a podcast really focused on issues related to medical students. And I don't know the numbers, I have to ask Michael, but I know it's over 8,000 downloads. It's probably much more than that by now. And then, our social media presence, we expanded during the pandemic. So the Twitter account became really popular during the pandemic, and for many reasons, but one of them was probably the webinar and the different, it's kind of like a touch point for medical student information also. For example, the Senior Society used us in our social media, and we had organized serendipitously an email listserv to all of our medical student chapters, the YNS medical student chapters. So all the pivots in the interview process during the pandemic going to virtual, many announcements were made through our social media and listserv we had just randomly developed for the pandemic. And so that was a really good point. We were like the point group for a lot of these changes that were happening in neurosurgery, particularly as it related to the interview trail. And then the student chapters and the different medical schools continues to grow, the YNS student chapters, the reviewer spots, due to the good job that all of our committee members did on those positions, grew and increased in size and was kind of renewed for another 2-year term. And then even beyond that, we kind of continue to grow the roles of the committee and maximize the position of leadership that we had to serve our members. So one of the things that we did is we started focusing on how can this group of people that are kind of perched in this national leadership position write and influence the field as far as like how the pathway is for young neurosurgeons. So we did a few different things. Like for instance, here's one. which is like the history of the Young Neurosurgery Committee that was published in the JNS. This is a recent senior society and combined young neurosurgeons survey of the experience of that group of people who are interviewing for neurosurgery that went through everything virtual, and to see what we want to keep, what we want to change in the future, what people, even all the way down to what people are looking for in programs. Amazing information. So this is just recently published in JNS. So this is just a few examples. So that's different ways that we tried to improve things. Then we started a fund for one of the people who was a NS employee who was tasked with kind of being the liaison to our committee. She mentored a lot of us and was amazing. So we actually started this, she retired, and so we started this fund with, it's complex how NREF funds work a little bit, but to get donations to ultimately like sponsor mentorship and education and research for medical students, particularly ones that have trouble getting plugged into national neurosurgery, maybe some sort of not the top 10 NIH funded locations or something like that. So anyway, we're in the midst of accepting donations. We have to hit a certain bench threshold, and then we can start using the money for medical student endeavors. But this is something else that we established during that time. So that's kind of an overview of how I went through things and how I thought about it, and some of the kind of the wins that we had, and how we kind of adapted to the adversity of the pandemic. I want to just impart like what I've found to be true through this process. And so I just was going to give a few slides on that. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to stop me. So, what I say is like how to get integrated into neurosurgery. I mean, there's a lot of people that want to be involved, and it's actually hard to get people involved, like for at least in my time in the Young Neurosurgery Committee, because there's only a few very heavily sought after positions on the committee for medical students, and they're elected. So a lot of people want to volunteer, and it's just hard to really integrate them, completely. So we try, but one of the big things is showing up and showing interest. So if you see someone one time, you kind of forget about them, but if you see them many times, then it helps, you to like, oh, that moment where you have something, they come to mind, right? So, number 2 is show up and show interest. And then of course, number 3 is also show up and show interest, right? Volunteer. So a lot of people, again, ask to volunteer, and on your mind, you don't have like a perfect thing for them, but if you see them and hear them enough, and see them, they've asked many people in your, Young Neurosurgery Committee, for example, and they've gotten something and they've done well with it, then the next time something comes up, you think of them as well, So, volunteer, and this goes not only for medical students, but also this goes for people like on the Young Neurosurgery Committee or similar committees or in the MSNTC. So you can't volunteer so much that you don't do quality work, but you should volunteer, and once you get a good project you think you're suited to do, do it. So even better than just volunteering is volunteer with a good idea. Now, the people I saw really take off, including myself, didn't just show up to the leadership and say, I want to volunteer. They actually said, hey, like I've identified a project that you guys, or something you guys are missing, and I want to lead fixing that, right? So like the Twitter thing was a good idea, like, a good example. So like, this group would really be really well served with a Twitter account. I would like to lead that. You don't have to worry about it. I'll do it. I'll write all the rules. I'll write everything. You can take it to the board. I'll manage it. You don't have to sweat it, but it'll make you look good as the leader of the organization, right? So that kind of thing, will send you to the stars in a way in organized neurosurgery. Another good example is actually the webinars. So the webinars, I had seen other people do webinars, but I hadn't really thought too carefully about it for the Young Neurosurgeons Committee. And there was a very enterprising medical student. He sent a beautiful presentation about a webinar that she actually wanted young neurosurgeons to collaborate with that she was doing at her medical school. And I told her, well, I'll help your medical school one, but what you've written here is spectacular, and I'm very impressed, and we should try and start a young neurosurgeons one, and you can be involved in that one as well. And then just because of the way that the resources ended up working out, and there was no in-person, resident education camps because of COVID, the NREF and us collaborated, and she was kind of the medical student who helped us behind the scenes, and made that happen. And so a medical student from Mexico was an integral part of the Young Neurosurgeons NREF webinars, right? Because she volunteered, but not only volunteered, but volunteered with a good idea and with a lot of work and unique skill that she could bring on the back end of it. So just another example of how not only volunteering, but volunteering with actually a good idea and a willingness to see it through can propel you. And I can tell a bunch of stories like that. But that's just one of my keys. Anytime you're given a task, even if it's not like your number one task you ever want to do, you got to do it. You have to do it really well and ideally quickly, a quick turnaround. This goes for everything. This goes if you're given a research project by a mentor. It's just really good rules in general, but it works for organized neurosurgery as well. And then finally, you just want to be really good to work with, affable and a team player, and enjoy your time on the committee. Like I said before, this is all volunteerism and it's all for the greater cause. Yes, there are within academic neurosurgery, you do need to develop a national reputation if you want to get promoted and all those diffuse positives of being involved, right? That is incentivized for academic neurosurgeons, for example. But in reality, it's a grind, it's a lot of stuff that you probably won't get credit for, other than like to cobble a million of them together to be in a position. But really enjoy it and enjoy the process with your colleagues and be a team player. And you just do that and you just repeat. That's pretty much it from my perspective. I'm sure I've missed some good points, but those are the ones I could think of. All right. So then, once you're in a position, right, how do you advance? So, also a grind, right? So same thing, show up and be reliable and professional. So just as an example, a Young Neurosurgeons Committee, if you're given a liaison position to a committee, a major committee, you got to show up, be reliable, be professional, do a good job for them, report back to us. And that advances you. If you can't show up or for some reason you have conflicts or you're saying and doing things there that aren't professional, you're probably not going to get a higher level position the next year. So that's just a basic competence. So be a motivated, consistent performer, like internally, if you're given a project, same thing, do it. Do a good job, do it quickly, do it well. I like this, like I just kind of mentioned before, coming up with your own way to contribute that's novel. So bring value above replacements. This is like a sports concept, which is how much value did Babe Ruth bring to his team above the average player of the same position, right? And so they've kind of tried to guess these values, and so they have a value above replacement index, right? So you want to not only be your average member that someone stuck in that position and planted them there, you want to bring value above that. Then you also want to demonstrate leadership skills, when you then are put in charge of a project that other people are under you, volunteers, students, whatever, you want them to like working for you and do work for you enthusiastically, right? So demonstrate some leadership skills. And then, when it does come time for advancement, you want to have that resume built out that allows you to advance. Because in organized neurosurgery, maybe in the 50 years ago, it wasn't a pure meritocracy, where you advance based on your service, but I think is really going that way and is largely that way now. And so you have to have that resume to advance. You can't just be, popular, on the softball team or something in advance. You have to do work. And then that's to the last point. These elections are largely based on merit. I don't like quotes, but this one I really like from The Art of War. And I think it's incredibly true when it comes to building your career in organized neurosurgery or just your career in general, or business. Which is opportunities multipliers are seized. So if you're demonstrating excellence and your projects are winning, and doing really well, and your ideas are doing really well, and you're fun to work with, then you're going to start getting a lot more opportunities. So every time you seize an opportunity and advance it, you're going to get many more opportunities. And at some point, you're actually going to have to worry about time management, and how I heard Dr. Bookvar at the end saying, without learning when to say no, but at the early stages, you have to get those opportunities. And so the way to get them and to get to the point where you have so many opportunities that you need to learn how to say no is to do really well with the projects you're given. And so I felt like this was exemplified by my run as Young Neurosurgeons Chair with all these things I did, right? I'm constantly being now asked to do other things. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Getting there. So I'll close up here. Just final keys to leadership. I don't know why these things, I'm just missing some of the bullet points, but you lead by example. Just like my Dr. Heroes, work is harder and harder than anyone else. You're asking anyone else to work. Be organized and follow up on what you delegate. So if you give someone a task, don't just forget about it. It never happens. You actually have to follow up on that as well and say, hey, how's it going? Seems simple, but it's impressive how many times that things fall through the cracks in volunteerism. Have a vision for growth and inspire everyone else towards that vision. You don't want to like snap the whip at people necessarily, it's particularly in volunteer organizations, but you want to inspire people to do things and ask them to do things in a way that they want to do it. And then adapt to the unexpected, use it as an opportunity for innovation, kind of like we did during the pandemic in our committee. Reward and praise others for their hard work. Very important to just be really gracious, stay positive, thankful, not have an ego. And to me, my goal is always to mentor the people that are below me to be as good or better than me. I think that's really important. It's not about the power, the attention, or you. It's really about service and improving the organization and the field and improving patient care and all these kinds of things. Not so much about.
Hey everyone, Ryan Rad here from neurosurgerytraining.org. If you like that video, subscribe and donate to keep our content available for medical students across the world.